But is the sin offering indicative in the 60s with Christians, maybe a form of Christianity that's saying, look, Gentiles and Jews are giving sin offerings? Is Clement saying he is also giving sin offerings here? Again, I told you, Patreon, you get a question, one per person. This goes for the history records. Roland, you made this trip possible. Another question from you. 1 Clement, the letter of 1 Clement. So, Dr. Carrier, welcome back to MythVision. How's it going?
It's going great. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to dig into reading. I can't read all this. There's just a lot of Greek.
Yeah, no, just the first paragraph.
Yep.
That's fine. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And I'm not going to know this Greek word, but okay, this letter is...
Yeah, I did, just for the audience, I did look at the question and the long list of evidence. A lot of it's in Greek and stuff. So I am aware of what's underneath it and what all that is. So which the question is good enough by itself, but we can talk about it.
Okay. This letter is quite peculiar, especially if it is dated early as Dr. Carrier thinks it is. In a number of places, it refers to, and I don't know, is that ethne or...
Yeah.
Ethne? Okay. It's a Greek word translated as Gentiles, which why I kind of figured it was ethne. Why would a Christian ever talk about Gentiles when they are Gentiles? Why would he talk about Levites, sin offerings and peace offerings, unless he was still a professing Jew, even if one that believes in the Messiah?
Yeah, it's a great question. To start with, I'm not alone in dating it early. In fact, there's one of the things I do. So one of the things I do in my new book, Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus, is I update everybody on what's happened in the 10 years since I published my original academic study on the historicity of Jesus, right? And one of the things that has happened is that I've gathered more examples of scholars who were siding with this position, and their arguments are pretty good, like they stack with mine. So I think the case is really strong that First Clement was written in the 60s AD, not 95 as the Christian legend has it. And one of the things is what was brought up here is that it actually talks about the temple cult is still standing and still working, and uses its still existence and still operation as an argument for their whole thing. And we have another video, you and I, where we talk about Clement. What you asked me, like, what is Clement's letter about? And we go into the detail of how it's trying to curb a rebellion, sort of like coup of the youth over the elders in Corinth, right? So like the church has been taken over and they want to revert everything back the way it was. And they go through this long series of examples that's try to prove like that they should be loyal, etc. And one of the examples is the current existence of the temple cult, which that doesn't make any sense after, like if it's written in 95, like that would be a dumb argument, right? Like, what are you talking about? That thing is destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. Why are you using it as an example? And also like it talks about like rebellions leading to destruction as an example that rebellions are bad. And so like part of the argument, so can you imagine if you're writing 95, if this is your argument, you're giving lists of examples of rebellions going badly, you're not going to mention the Jewish war, right? Like, so here's a perfect example of the Jews rebelled. God punished them by destroying Judea, destroying Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is now a ruin, and the temple cult is destroyed. Like that would be just a prime example. Like it would be just a powerful.
You're saying the silence is screaming.
Yeah, and it's not just silence, because he not only does he not mention the destruction as like and it's perfectly in line with his argument. There's no reason that he would omit it. But also he's talking about the temple cult is still standing, right? Like, so like as part of his argument is exactly the opposite. Oh, the temple cult is still standing. Look how loyalty matters and so on. So like the argument makes zero sense in 95. It only makes sense before the war. And he's talking about Paul and Peter are dead at that point. So it has to be the 60s, because we know Paul's letters go up to the end of the 50s, right? So and there are other arguments, but those are the main ones. But there are others, like there's the way it talks about bishops and deacons reflects Pauline era rather than later era administration. Like the way people thought about bishops and stuff is different when it started than when it came out later, and so on. So like there's a lot of evidence in there that really pegs this as early rather than late. But that one is the strongest case. And like I said, there's Heron, there's various other scholars who've made these arguments as well. I'm not the only one. And they're all cited in my new book. So it's probably 60s. And so the question that we're being asked now, however, is why, let's assume that the mainstream theory is that this is a predominantly Gentile movement at this point. So that's actually not strictly speaking true, because Paul makes very clear that all his congregations are mixed. So they have, like, his goal was to bring in Gentiles, totally. So like his churches are Gentile heavy because that was his whole mission. But they're not Gentile exclusive. So like there are, and a lot of his stuff is like trying to get the Jewish and Gentile components to like go get along, right? So like some of these have Jews in them. So they're not exclusively Gentile. So we can't even really say whether Clement is Jew or Gentile, since they're obviously Pauline. They're in the Pauline sectarian matrix. They don't care whether you're Jew or Gentile, because that's not relevant. It only matters if you're in the community as a Christian.
Right.
But there's more to this. So even the Gentile Christians understand that their entire religion is built on the top of Jewish history and scripture, right? So they're co-opting all the vocabulary, all the history, all the ways of thinking of Judaism, right? So they're not like anti-Jewish, right? That comes later. Yeah. That's, by the time you get to we start to see the most anti-Jewish stuff like late 1st, early 2nd century, where you get like more of the anti-Semitism creeps in. But no, once this is early, so they're not anti. They're actually like taking this as celebratory. And there's a parallel with Mithraism. So Mithraism is a mystery cult that grew across Rome around the same time as Christianity. And it's built on Persian history and scripture and stuff. But it's mostly non-Persians. It's mostly Greeks and Romans that are joining it. But they're still building all their discourse, all their vocabulary, all their self-identity on top of all the Persian scriptures and language and idioms and all of that stuff. So it's another example of like, that doesn't really tell you anything about the identity of the person, because they're identifying with that other culture. So they're absorbing all of that stuff.
Right.
So you can't,
biblical language.
right. So yeah, if you run into a Mithraist who's talking like a Persian, you can't say, oh, he must be a Persian. Doesn't follow, right? And so the same thing happens with First Clement. Just because the examples, and because they go into scripture too, like really reliant on scripture. They go, they've got the whole Adam, Eve, all of that stuff is like that kind of early Genesis narrative is in there. And so the point being is like that they've absorbed all this culture, and this is the language that they use and the scriptures that they cite. You can't tell whether they're Gentile or Jewish for that reason. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that ethni, like the idea of ethni, really means ethnic groups, tribes. And really what it means, like it was most commonly used to refer to nations, right? So it kind of like, and so pagans also use this word. So this word is not Gentile. Gentile is a anachronism. That is a modern English word. They're not saying Gentile. They're saying nations. Everywhere they go, they're saying nations. Pagans also did this. It goes back to Homer. Homer calls all the nations of the Greeks the ethni, right? All the other non-Greek nations are all the ethni. So like all the different nations are ethni. It's the Jews kind of create a spin on this, is like the ethni are different from us.
Yes.
But that's, the Jewish perspective.
It's like Greeks and barbarians.
Right. It's like that. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, there are some Greek authors that use ethni as the reference to the barbarians, because they're the tribes, they're the nations, but we're the Greeks. So they do the same thing, right? So it's like Greeks versus Gentiles, right? But it doesn't, obviously the Jewish construction is different. But the point being is that when First Clement uses words like ethni, you can't tell whether he's understanding it in the Jewish understanding of it or just in the broad pagan understanding of it. It's just a way of saying all the peoples of the earth, right? It's the peoples, the nations, etc. It's a way of talking that is not Roman Empire inclusive, or exclusive, I should say. So it's a way of talking that is not exclusive to the Roman Empire. So if you're talking about like we're gonna dominate all peoples, or all peoples will be Christian, it's a way of saying it's not just a Roman Empire thing. It's going to go all the way to India and Persia and the Germans and the Brits and the Celts, and they're all going to be, like the Ethiopians and all the people. They're all going to come together. So you would say ethni, right? So it doesn't necessarily imply this Jewish Gentile opposition. And then even then, there's also, since they're absorbing all of the idioms and ways of thinking from the Jews, First Clement could easily, as a Gentile, speak of ethni in terms of the Jewish concept of Gentiles, because he's talking within the concepts of the things that they borrowed from Judaism. So he would have to draw the inference that First Clement is Jewish, much less his audience, much less his backers at Rome and so on. You would have to have him say something that made it very clear that he didn't think of himself as one, or that he thought that there was the distinction mattered somehow to his argument in terms of like Jewish Christians have more authority than ethnic Christians or whatever. Like you have to have something in there like that, and we don't have that. So we can't tell what the ethnicity is of First Clement.
Okay. Sorry, the quick call came in, but that's fine. We cut it just right here. But he was still a professing Jew. It sounds like why would he talk about sin offerings and peace offerings? And what's interesting about that question to me, when you read Ephesians, and it talks about the dividing wall that is separated between the nations and Jews that's torn down.
Right.
I think of the temple too in some way. Now it indicates or seems that
Yeah, and you're co-opting all these ideas and concepts to in the Pauline sect, they're doing it to unify Gentiles and Jews. The Petrine sect, which was the Torah observant sect, used it to separate. So like if you wanted to be a Christian, you had to become Jewish. You had to convert, get circumcised, follow Torah, etc.
It sounds to me if they're using this language in 1 Clement, to me, I mean, I haven't read this in depth, but it sounds like how Ephesians still talks about how the temple, the wall of separation needed to be brought down. And that wall, I'm imagining Paul or the pseudo Paul that's writing Ephesians, it has in mind that wall that had all the different languages don't go beyond this spot if you're a Jew. And so Paul's whole point is, no, we're equal. But is the sin offering indicative in the 60s with Christians, maybe a form of Christianity that's saying, look, Gentiles and Jews are giving sin offerings. Is Clement saying he is also giving sin offerings here?
No, he never really does. His perspective, he's using it as an example of something, right? So he's not like arguing for it or against it. He's just saying that it's an example of the Jews being loyal to God, right? So it's just an example. There's no point where the problem that Clement is dealing with has nothing to do with Jews versus Gentiles. Like Paul's letters often have conflict within his churches between the Jewish faction and the Gentile faction. He's dealing with that. Clement isn't dealing with that. Like so, he's kind of silent on it. So like and we know that the churches are definitely heavily Gentile, that's for sure. And if it's the 60s, they probably still have some significant Jewish component, but Clement's perspective is really cosmopolitan. Like his whole line of argument is designed to appeal to both Jewish readers and Gentile readers. So like it seems like he's speaking to a mixed church, and he's not picking sides in that argument, which would be a bad move for him anyway, because he wants to solve a political problem that has nothing to do with that. So he doesn't want to throw a wrench in there with getting people in the weeds of Jews arguing against Gentiles, right? So his whole composition is designed to hit both audiences. And he can do that because the Gentile Christians has absorbed and co-opted all of this Jewish identity stuff, right? Like the scriptures and the respect for the temple and all of that. It's all part of their merger at that time. We're talking in the 60s. Like things change later when you get a bigger separation between the Gentile and Jewish churches.
Thank you so much, Roland. I hope that answered your question. Join the Patreon, help support us. Thanks.